Good evening, everybody. This is John Marola from Keeping It Real Section 5 Football, and this is our second season, our 18th episode, and overall, it's our 71st episode of Keeping It Real Section 5 Football. So, as I said every week, we're just moving right along. Before I get started, let me go over a couple things here first. For people that have not subscribed, please subscribe right now. It'd be very, very helpful. People that have subscribed, I just got to say, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and definitely helps us out a lot. After that is our sponsors. Those will be up at the end of our show, and you can just go down. If you like to be a sponsor or know somebody that would like to be a sponsor, please just give me a call or email me, and we would love to have anybody, be partners with us, and we'd even get you on the show for an episode. So, with all that being said, let me start introducing both my co-hosts. Co-hosts are back on my far right. Section 5 Hall of Fame coach from East High School, Paul Brigandi. Coach.
Thank you, John. And Dave, glad to see you.
Paul, welcome.
Welcome back. So, next to him is Section 5 Hall of Fame coach for football and baseball at Fairport High School, head coach Dave Lanning. Coach, welcome back.
Thank you, John.
And our guy in the middle. This one is LeRoy Kelmom. This is the first combined. You guys were combined last year? Past year, correct?
1 year under our belt, yeah.
1 year under your belt. Mike Humphrey from LeRoy Kelmom. Michael, thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And we're just going to talk a little bit about, how this all came about, and, we were talking a little bit earlier that my mother is a cheerleader back in LeRoy when she was there. My dad played football at Kelmom. So, I've said before, I think my first game was, LeRoy Kelmom game was, I think I was 3 years old. It was probably 1967.
I was going to say long before that, but okay.
Not that long. Not as long as you, Coach.
Right after the war.
Yeah. So, we're going to get started right now. Coach, you want to take it over?
Be happy to. Coach, welcome. And what we'd like to do is find out a little bit about you, first of all, before we get into your coaching experiences. Coach, where'd you grow up?
LeRoy.
Okay.
Born in LeRoy, raised in LeRoy, now work in LeRoy. So
Went
LeRoy.
to school all through LeRoy?
Yep.
Great. Your first exposure to football, what was that?
Oh, man. My dad was the youth coach, and I have 3 older brothers that he coached. So my first exposure would have just been, I guess, going to those practices, my dad's practices, my older brother's practices, and first played. When do you start? 8 years old, so that would have been 1998. And yeah, off and running from there.
Okay, that's great. And I know football's important to LeRoy.
Yeah.
In that area. So I'm sure that at an early age you realized that. Yep. And how about some of your early role models or mentors?
Like I just mentioned, I do have 3 older brothers that played the game before I did, and my dad was a coach, so got to mention them. Growing up, as you said, LeRoy, football is very important, and I think back at some of those players when I was 10, 11, 12 years old. They were at the varsity level. You had names like Joe Shaughnessy, Don Miller, Brendan Fulmer. I can name a couple other Shaughnessy's as well, Dave and Brandon, sure. Kyle Miller. Just a lot of really good players on a lot of really good teams that I looked up to growing up.
Coach, tell me then, as far as where you went on to college, and how did you get the coaching job? How did this opportunity start for you?
Yeah, so I went to college at SUNY Cortland, studied phys ed, played football for 4 years. Coaching was always on the radar. Teaching obviously was on the radar. I was lucky enough to student teach in LeRoy, which kind of led right to a job in that district. And like I said, coaching was always on the radar. And my first year, I coached modified football. I think that was only 1 year. Coached JV football, I think 8-ish years after that. And then at the time, it was Coach Herdline, Brian Herdline, who I work with now and have for about 10 years. he stepped down, and I just stepped right in, I suppose, at that time, which would have been, 2 years ago now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, when you started, it hadn't combined yet. Is that correct?
Correct.
So you were the LeRoy coach, and you played your first season. I suppose you played Calmon?
No.
You did not?
We did not. So that rival, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's certainly a historical rivalry, but it wasn't the last 10 years, not so much, right? I think the last time we played them, this could, I'm not going to be probably 100% accurate here, but I think the last time we played them would have been 15, 16, 17, 2000, somewhere in there. Yeah, so we went years without playing them because they were Class D, we were Class C, and I think one year they might have been even bigger than that when they initially merged with Byron Burgeon. So the rivalry kind of died down a little bit. So as a coach of LeRoy, I almost never played against Caledonia.
No.
But as a player,
Yes, definitely as a player. Yep.
so
What were those games like, Coach?
Oh, good. I mean, they were, it was always, even if one team was having a down year, those games were always competitive. It didn't matter how, what your record was going into that game. But 06, no, I'm sorry, I played them in 05, 06, 07, no, I'm wrong again, 06, 07, 08. 06, I was injured, but that was a very competitive game. I believe it came down to our final drive. I think it was 4th and 10. And I have to give a shout-out to my brother here. I think he ran in for a touchdown there with less than a couple of minutes left. 07 would have been my junior year. We beat him in Caledonia, another competitive game. And we were really good that year. We were pretty loaded with a lot of college players, a lot of size, a lot of athletes, and I thought we should have beaten them by a lot, and we didn't. That's just how those games went, right?
Sure.
Senior year was kind of similar. I think we were having a much better year than they were, but it was extremely competitive. We were down 14-0 early. We ended up beating them, but those were just games that you have memories that'll last a lifetime.
At that point, could you have seen a merger on the horizon or anything, or what was that like?
So we used to actually talk about as kids going through the program, what if we merged with Caledonia just completely, hypothetical situations. And those were always just fun conversations to have because of how good those teams were back then and how close we were. And no, to answer your question, no. The idea of a merger was never even realistically thought about, no.
I think about just the great tradition of both programs. And I remember attending a game. Our friend Jim Lumline was the head coach at LeRoy. And, you talk about 5 rows deep, people in ladders watching the game. And, it really was bragging rights for the next 60 years of a lot of people's lives that were involved in that game. And, you had mentioned Byron Burgeon. Are they also part of the combine with you guys?
They are not. They are not. They were merged with Notre Dame, Batavia Notre Dame last year.
Okay.
They were Class D team. Yep. They got moved around.
So you took the LeRoy job, head coach job.
Yep.
Now, talk of the merger starts?
Yeah, so there was actually a lot of talk about the merger my first year as the LeRoy coach. There was a meeting that was held in the auditorium at LeRoy that involved community members and coaches and everybody else. This is prior to the 2023 season. Basically, it was just decided that it wasn't time to merge at that point. But anyways, I ended up coaching that LeRoy team. We won a sectional title. That was my first year. That was 2 years ago. And then the second that season ended, really, I started the conversation with whoever, whether it was superintendent or principal, AD, whoever I needed to talk to about that merger, and kind of went off from there because it was mostly just a numbers thing, right? We just wanted to maintain 11-man football in 3 levels, and neither could they, so it was a necessity.
And Coach, when the merger was decided, how did you select your coaching staff, and do you have some that were on the Caledonia coaching staff, some that you rehired with the LeRoy coaching staff, and tell me a little bit about the selection of what you had to do then putting together a coaching staff.
So it was definitely a process. I'm not going to remember exactly how it went. I don't know how many details they'd want me to give you, but yeah, there was definitely some coaches that were carried over from LeRoy. There was a selection process that involved coaches that were coaching at Caledonia, although I don't believe the handful that we have now were a part of the staff before. One of them was, I think. But all three of them do have coaching experience. They weren't directly in Caledonia the year before the merger, but they do have coaching experience. But yeah, there were interviews, and there were, I guess, your kind of general normal process of picking coaches. Yeah.
And how do you I mean, I'm just curious, do you play games at Caledonia and LeRoy, or is there the games being played more LeRoy, or where are you practicing out of, and how does that dynamic work?
So there's a lot of different directions you can go, or a lot of different reasons you can have for doing your schedule the way you do it. And I talked to a lot of different guys about what they did and why and what worked for them. But basically try to keep it as 50-50 as possible, within reason. Try to keep it consistent at the same time. It can be really tricky. There's a lot of things you don't think of that you need some outside help to kind of figure out. I mean, it's simple things like homecoming games. You're right. I don't think of that, right?
Yeah.
They do. They got to have a homecoming for both. You got to have a senior night for both and all that, when you're just thinking of where am I going to practice and how am I going to get the kids a consistent schedule, and then things like that kind of change it around. But, there's a team of people figuring it out. But the idea, try to keep it as even as possible. You get 4 home games a year, 2 in Caledonia, 2 in LeRoy. Try to split the practices, half in LeRoy, half in Caledonia. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that as well. But we like to go half the year in LeRoy and then kind of one big switch, and then we're in Caledonia the other half. Sometimes you'll see kind of week to week or even day to day, depending on who you talk to. Yeah. And I wanted it to be as consistent as possible.
And now, is that the same for the JV levels too, and your younger levels?
Yes. I mean, again, we've only done 1 year, so we're kind of working out the kinks as we go along here. But yeah, last year we had all 3 levels in one location, switched over, all 3 levels in the other. Yep.
What about Pop Warner? Have you
Pop
guys
Warner?
gotten that far yet?
Yeah. No, they're completely separate still.
Okay.
And their numbers are great. Youth
Both
football.
sides.
Yes, as far as I know they were last year. Yep.
That's cool. That's good.
Yeah, so they are still separate, and I think we'd like to keep it that way. As long as you don't merge unless you have to, right?
Yeah,
That's the idea.
yeah,
if you don't have
yeah.
to merge down there, let's not merge.
Do you ever think that you guys would separate if your numbers came back up?
I wouldn't. It's not completely up to me, right? But I don't like the idea of separating. It's too much work to make it work, and then to all of a sudden just go back to that.
Yeah.
That would
I mean,
happen.
I wouldn't think it would happen. I really wouldn't. But if theoretically the numbers all of a sudden skyrocketed, maybe.
Let's back up a step, Coach.
Yeah.
When this merger was in the works, was there much pushback from some of the old timers in either LeRoy or Calmon?
Yeah, for sure. And understandably so. I remember when it first got brought up in 2023, I was kind of anti-merger for sure. It's just...
And you played through that back in the day, and you knew that riverry after
yeah,
you
it
played.
was just...
know?
If you didn't have to absolutely do it, you just didn't want to do it. It was just because you saw how much work it would be, and it didn't seem like it initially, without putting a total ton of thought into it. You're just like, no, why would we do that, right? And the old timers that aren't directly involved in it, they definitely didn't see that it was necessary, I don't think, or didn't want to believe that it was necessary. And I completely understand that. You got a ton of passion on both sides.
Yep.
Why would we merge? I don't want to merge. You're ruining a rivalry, and that is all legitimate arguments, and you understand where that's coming from.
Now, if no merger, what would be the state of things?
LeRoy wouldn't have been able to do 3 programs last year, I don't believe. Caledonia definitely not. Their enrollment's way down. Going back years, and ours is going down too. I mean, that's
Chances
small
football would have
schools.
disappeared.
I don't think it would have disappeared, but it would have been an 8-man situation in Caledonia most likely. And if we looked at LeRoy, it would have been like a Mod A. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that.
Yep.
Probably would have been like a Mod A, no JV type situation.
A lot of kids playing up, a lot of sophomores.
Yeah,
playing up,
which
sort of thing.
isn't good. I don't think a lot of teams
Not
do
always.
it, but I'm not. I'd like to maintain 3 programs. Right, that's the idea. 3 levels.
How about the breakdown of kids? LeRoy, Calmon.
How many are on the team, first of all? Approximately. I know it varies. But
Last year's numbers, even with the merger, right?
Yep.
Low 20s, mid 20s on the varsity level.
25.
Most 25. I don't remember off the top of
Okay.
my head. I'd say most 25. JVs, similar, but I think a little bit more. Modifieds was 45-50, right? We actually had 2 separate modified teams. And you get that, right? The numbers naturally go down as you get older. This upcoming year, and it was definitely more LeRoy than Caledonia. More LeRoy than Caledonia. We have more enrollment, so that makes sense. Bigger class sizes. This year's closer to 50-50, but definitely still a little bit more LeRoy, less Caledonia, but we're getting closer.
Coach, I want to ask a little bit, because now this is your first off season with the going through the combined program. How do you budget your time between the 2 schools and your coaching staff?
Right.
How's that working for you?
So honestly, like our spring ball, we call it, is almost harder to do with the merge program than it is regular season, because our traditional spring ball schedule at LeRoy throughout the last decade or so, or when Coach Moran was even there, so we would actually get together before school in the month of March, a couple of days a week. You can't bring Caledonia kids over to LeRoy before school. It just it doesn't work. And, small schools, everyone's doing 3 sports, so you can't really grab them on a Monday night or a Tuesday night, or even the weekends are tough, right? Everyone's doing a ton of different things at these small schools. You don't have much specialization. I don't just have football players. So it is really tricky to maintain good attendance this time of year during the off season, during the spring. But we got a schedule we think works. I actually did the same routine in March, a couple days a week. Before school at LeRoy. No, we just did it in Caledonia too. And we invited LeRoy kids to come over to Caledonia based on the start of school time. LeRoy kids, it was more realistic they could actually make it to Caledonia and get back to LeRoy for school. Wasn't mandatory. Nothing's allowed to be mandatory. But definitely wasn't going to make them drive to Caledonia before school. But they did. They did. We had pretty good participation, pretty good dedication. And, you do things separate almost because you have to. But then you try to get them together as much as possible, right? If it makes sense.
What do you have as far as the upcoming, some of your summer program things that your teams will be involved in? What are the plans when we start getting into end of June, July, August till start of football?
Yeah, so that schedule's pretty much set. That'll be split 50-50, just like everything else. The first half of the summer, I believe. Well, that was last year what I'm thinking of. Sorry. We get together 3 days a week. One of those days is on the field. The other 3 days are lifts. And between those things, it's basically half in LeRoy, half Caledonia. Okay. We get on the field in Caledonia. They got the turf. Like to get on the turf. They have a really nice weight room in that district as well, so we get in there as much as possible. And we got a weight room in town in LeRoy that actually our defensive coordinator owns, which is really convenient, really nice. So, we get together 3 times a week and split it, LeRoy, Caledonia, starting, mid to late June. Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about your past season, Coach.
Yep.
Were you satisfied with it, or?
The goal is always to win every game,
Sure.
right? Yep. So if you look at it from that standpoint, we did that half the time, but we did compete in the sectional finals, and we did have, when you're looking at it, just like I said, it wins and losses. You don't think it was great, but you look at our schedule; it's a really tough schedule. The scheduling situation in Section 5 small schools is kind of a mess. Not to anyone's fault. It's just there's not teams. There's not Class C teams to play. So we played Batavia week 1, who was really tough. They took it to us pretty good. We played a Bishop Timon team out of Buffalo that was really tough. We competed with them for 4 quarters. And we lost to a Letchworth Perry Warsaw team in the regular season. That was pretty tough, too, that we ended up beating in the sectional semifinals. That's a well-coached team, tough kids. But it was a tough schedule. You want to win every game, like I said, but we did compete for a sectional final. And considering the amount of work that went into it and the amount of changes that everyone had to deal with, then you think, it was a pretty successful season.
At the time, it was probably tough because you're in it to win it.
Yeah.
But then after the dust cleared and everything, me personally, I thought you guys had a great year. Considering,
you know
what I mean? When you go, when you step back and say, look at the situation and how much. I mean, you can't coach like a normal coach.
Yeah.
Because you got kids from 2 different communities. And the biggest thing what I wanted to ask was, we talked about earlier, was the biggest thing is the kids. How did the kids get to, LeRoy Kelmum hasn't played some years, so the kids aren't really affected. It's more the old timers.
Sure.
But you started off a little slow.
Yeah.
But at the end of the year, man, you're right. Right there.
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at how the kids dealt with it, and I've said this before, you go into the season kind of worrying, are the kids going to blend? Are they going to fight for you the way your kids did, the year before? And it was seamless. It really
awesome.
was. It was seamless.
And that's the biggest part.
That's the biggest part. I mean, a lot of things are changed. More things are changing for them than maybe for me. You can make that argument, right?
Yeah,
I mean, they're getting here and there, and they're getting a whole new staff, a whole new schedule, a whole new everything, just like we are. And I thought we practiced really well. I really did, and the kids played hard for sure. Like I said, it was seamless. Kids dealt with it really well.
That's good. That's real good. Coaches?
Yeah, here's one for you, Coach, maybe a tough one. How do you see the state of Section 5 football right now?
I don't know if I could speak for the whole Section 5 football. Right. The last few months, I know there's been, and I'm maybe somewhat out of this conversation, maybe more than some other guys, but scheduling is really tough, right? Scheduling is really tough for a lot of different reasons. Just like I said, in small schools, you don't have the teams. I know Class Ds are having to play a crossover game against Class Cs because they don't have their schedule filled. Class C last year, I think, only had 6 teams, so we had 5 games. We had 3 games we had to just find. Section 5 finds them for us with Federation scheduling. And then you got the independents, which, for the most part, only affects DC and B. I don't think that affects the larger schools at all.
No.
And that's what, putting the biggest wrinkle in the scheduling is those independent teams. If there weren't independent teams, and I don't understand why teams go independent. There's a lot of arguments here and there for that. But Class B and C would be pretty much full. I think it would be absolutely be full, those schedules. I'm not positive. I don't want to say that for sure. But I think there's a lot of really good teams. I think there's a lot of really good coaches and a lot of really good players. But I think our participation, I don't know if this goes statewide either. I don't know if this is a Section 5 problem, finding these games. I don't know if you guys know. I don't know. But I know small schools, it's just with the mergers and numbers and independent, it's really tough to fill a schedule within your class, within your section, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Where do you think, give me your thoughts, 2025 season. You guys are getting ready. Kids coming back.
Well, small school, high school football, right, you're rebuilding every year.
Yeah.
We graduated 14 seniors. The year before that, we graduated 14 seniors.
28 in 2 years, yeah.
Right. JVs were undefeated last year. That matters, but doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
But we got some young kids coming up that are definitely going to be really good football players. We got a lot of returners in a lot of important positions. Our offensive line, which, most coaches will say is where your offense starts, right? I think you can make that argument for sure, is pretty much all brand new, right? So that's something you got to take care of quick. Find some guys that can play those positions, which we do, and we trust. A lot of rebuilding, a lot of half the teams returning ish, but we like where we are. A lot of things that we dealt with last year, being a merged situation, we're not dealing with this year. We've kind of cleared that dust, so I think we're off and running pretty much.
And I'm sure
pretty soon here,
being successful as you guys were last year, you get more people jumping, aboard. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, winning takes care of everything, right?
Exactly.
Not that we won the sectional final, but we showed teams that we're going to compete for sure. Yep.
Yeah. Yes.
Coach, you talked about a merge situation. What advice would you give to someone getting in as a head coach and now having to take on a merge situation? Some of the lessons you learned this year that you will carry on, and some advice to, because you're seeing more and more of programs merging, and just some of your experience with it.
Communication is so important, and you just gotta make sure that there's easy ways to communicate with everyone that you need to communicate with. Right now, it's not just communicating with LeRoy's AD; it's Caledonia's also. Yep. It's not just LeRoy's transportation service; it's Caledonia's also. It's their superintendent and our superintendent. There's just double the amount of people involved in everything. So communication is important. You got to have coaches you can trust, and you got to have coaches in both districts. A lot of these merged programs, I shouldn't say a lot, but there's some of these merged programs where one side is represented way more than the other, both staff and players. You don't have a ton of control over players, but staff-wise, it's extremely important to have people in both districts that you can trust to, take care of things that you can't, right? It's nice to have someone in Caledonia. I text or call and say, hey, can you do this for me? And it's just done, right?
Awesome.
If I didn't have that option,
it's uphill.
it's tough. It's really tough. You're taking care of other things rather than the kids on the field. That's not ideal.
Yeah.
You're the head coach. What about your responsibilities? Particularly, do you work on the offensive side, defensive side? What?
More offensive for sure. I work, when we go individuals defensively. I work with the defensive backs as kind of an assistant defensive back guy. Offensively, I usually take the receivers, but I like to take the quarterbacks and running backs as well. Definitely more of an offensive guy for sure. And, despite being a receiver, I like to run the ball a lot. That's for sure. Yeah. So,
How about if you're going to encapsulate your philosophy as a coach?
I always tell the kids it's a simple game, right? Work hard and do what you're told.
Yep.
And that's the foundation of where you go from there. But philosophy, keep it simple, play fast. If you keep things simple, you're not thinking out in the field. It allows you just to react and play with instinct. And
We had a coach that
keep it simple, play fast for sure.
Yeah.
that we used to coach with us. It just brought back some memories. His name was Jack Foote. And he used to tell us, KISS, keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, sure. Sure.
Just make it so. And that's on all levels of football.
Yeah.
In the summertime, I do security at St. John Fisher where the Bills are in town. So I'm with the Bills players when they're in their dorms. Up in the classrooms when they're doing their indie meet, I'm up there, and I hear a lot. Of stuff. And the stuff that we do in high school, like the indie stuff, they do it 3 times as much as high schools do.
Right.
And because when kids are younger, if they're more athletic, bigger, stronger, in high school they're going to get away with that. Mm-hmm. When they get up into the NFL, everybody's big and strong, so their technique is even more so.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's just being around that. It's good to see that what we're teaching the kids. It's the same thing that the
fundamentals, right?
Yeah,
all the way through.
So if I go to a LeRoy Calmon game, what can I expect to see offensively and defensively?
Offensively, you're going to see us run the ball. You're going to see a lot of different athletes run the ball. Mm-hmm. Our pass game will be based off play action for sure. We'll have a quarterback that's athletic, and we'll have a physical offensive line for sure.
What are you going to line up in?
Mostly just a pro set, tight end, 2 receivers, 2 backs in the backfield. We have a physical fullback. That's an extension of our offensive line.
I don't want to step on your toes here. Yeah. I maintain that in high school football right now, if you line up a tight end and a fullback, a lot of teams won't know what to do with them because you see so much spread now.
For sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's
good for you.
They only have 3 or 4 days to prepare for you, and it's like you're not going to see that again for the rest of the season. Right. Now you've got to get prepared for that.
It's a little bit more common, I'm assuming, in small school football than it is in big school football for sure. But on to your point, right, there's keeping it simple. You try to over-game plan sometimes. At the end of the day, especially, again, small school football, if you're better at what you do than what they are, what they do, most of the time you're going to win the game. Most of the time you're going to win.
How about on the defensive side?
Defensive side, we'll have a really physical defensive line. We'll have 4 down. We won't blitz a ton. Mostly stay in a cover 3. And hopefully we have kids that fly around, try to get 11 guys to the ball every single time.
Nice. Very, very nice.
Yeah.
So, overall, what is your thoughts? Going back to last year, how did you think everything went? I mean, everything. I mean, was it after this is now over and done, do you think that it was easier, harder, or no, that's what I pictured?
I think it's about what I pictured.
Yeah.
It went really well. I said it before. The goal was to win. We fell short. But the kids, they played hard. They competed. Both districts were super supportive of everything I did. Coaching staff was great.
And I'm sure.
Yeah, I think we're on the right path for sure.
I'm sure the districts, both are going to, as they get more comfortable with it, and we've always said, we said it before, winning, that soothes a lot of
Sure.
stuff, But just being around that and that success that's all people are basically looking for.
Right.
So.
Coach, who do you open up with, and where's that your opening game this coming season?
Well, nothing's too official yet, so I got to say that what I tell you might change tomorrow. Might get a text here later tonight. But right now it's a home game against Attica. That is our crossover game. They're a Class D team. Attica
Would
is.
that be at LeRoy or Kel Mum in the beginning of
I
the
believe it's LeRoy, but again, that
That
could
could be
change.
changed.
That could
Everything's
change.
subject to change.
There's. Yeah, we might get another Class C team here in the next couple of weeks based on a merger or something. It
Right,
happens.
right.
It's tough to put anything in stone this time of year.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really good.
I've got 2 questions for you, Coach, and then maybe the other guys. You don't see a whole lot of lifers anymore, coaching lifers. Are you in this for the long haul, do you think?
That's the plan. That's the plan.
Good for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd get bored. I don't know what I'd do. I'd have a lot more free time, but I'm not sure I necessarily want the free time. You know what I mean?
Right.
I like what I do. I like spending time with the kids. I like seeing them grow. I like my job as an elementary PE teacher. I have 2 young ones that are a half a year old and 2.5 years old, and I'd like to be coaching through their high school, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we'll see. You never know. But that's the plan, right? That's the plan.
Well,
no
good.
doubt.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
And secondly, now you're a veteran coach. You've been at it for a little bit. What advice do you have for a guy who's just starting out or a girl starting out in coaching?
Stay organized. I would say it's going to be more work than you expect, even despite what people tell you. And just, be patient because you're going to get stressed out. You're going to probably overthink things, probably maybe try to do too much. I don't know. Be patient, stay organized, and stay with it because it gets easier. In certain ways, it gets easier.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
After you get your ups and downs a little bit and your growing pains. Everybody goes through the growing pains.
When things are new, they're tough, I think, and you just got to stick with it.
Do you coach any other sports?
Yeah, so I did coach JV basketball for about 8 years or so. I lightened my load a little bit when I got the head football job. But I coached varsity track for about the same amount of time, 8-10 years. Now I currently coach modified track, which is going on right now, and I do driver ed all year. That's not coaching, but that's another extracurricular. But yeah, yep.
Nice. Coaches, we
I'm
good?
all set.
We good?
Very good.
Coach,
Okay.
appreciate your insights.
Yeah,
Thank you.
appreciate you guys
Good job,
having
Coach.
me. Yep, thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Yep.
Now, when we end, I don't know if you've watched any of our shows. At the end, we're going to point at the cameras. I'll say 1, 2, 3, and then we'll say "Keeping It Real," Section 5 football.
Okay.
You ready? 1, 2, 3.
Keeping it real, Section 5 football.
Good night, everybody. Have
Good
a
night.
great night.